9-year-old Jaden stood nervously at the front of the small church, clutching the ring pillow so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful beams of light across the room, but all he could focus on was the knot tightening in his stomach. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his father's life. Marcus was about to marry Tanisha, a woman Jaden once thought could make their family whole again. But everything had changed. As the guests murmured in excitement, their attention fixed on the soon-to-arrive bride, Jaden's thoughts were racing. He could barely stand still, shifting his feet and glancing at his father, who stood tall at the altar in a sharp black suit, grinning in anticipation. "You ready, little man?" Marcus whispered, leaning down to ruffle Jaden's neatly combed hair. Jaden forced a smile. "Yeah, Daddy," muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But inside, he was screaming. He wanted to say something, anything, to stop this wedding. He had to, for his father's sake. It had been just over a year since Jaden's mother passed away, leaving him and Marcus to navigate the world together. They had formed a tight bond. A team of two. So when Tanisha came into their lives, at first Jaden wanted to like her. He wanted to see his father happy again, and for a while he convinced himself that maybe Tanisha was what their family needed. But over the past few months, Jaden had seen things that didn't sit right with him. Tanisha was charming when Marcus was around, always laughing, always kind. But when they were alone, her smiles faded, and her words became sharp. Jaden tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that crept in every time she snapped at him for the smallest mistake. "You need to learn to be less of a burden," she'd say, her eyes cold. Jaden shook off the memory, trying to focus on the present. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the conversation he'd overheard a few weeks ago. It was late at night, and he had gotten up for a glass of water. Tanisha was in the living room, whispering into her phone. "Yeah, after the wedding," she had said, her voice low and urgent. "The policy's all set. Once it's done, we're clear for the payout. He won't suspect a thing." At the time, Jaden didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew enough to feel a chill run down his spine. Policy? Payout? What was she planning? And who was she talking to? He had wanted to tell his dad, but every time he tried, something held him back. Fear? Doubt? Maybe he was wrong? But standing here now, watching Marcus smile, completely unaware of the danger he was in, Jaden knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. The music changed, signaling that the bride was about to enter. The church doors swung open and Tanisha appeared, radiant in her white dress, her long curls cascading down her back. She smiled, a perfect, dazzling smile that made the guests murmur with admiration. Jaden's stomach twisted even tighter. She looked perfect, but he knew the truth. He had to tell his dad before it was too late. As Tanisha walked down the aisle, her eyes briefly met Jaden's. For a moment, her smile faltered, and in that split second, he saw the truth behind her carefully crafted facade, cold, calculating look she wore when his father wasn't around. The officiant began to speak, his voice calm and steady, but the words were just a blur to Jaden. His heart raced, and the pressure in his chest grew unbearable. He glanced at his father, then back at Tanisha. He couldn't let this happen, but what if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? The officiant's voice broke through his thoughts. "If anyone knows any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." Time seemed to freeze. Jaden's throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. This was his chance to stop everything, but fear gripped him. His legs felt like they were made of lead, his hands shaking as he clutched the pillow. His eyes darted from his father to Tanisha, whose smile was still plastered on her face. She was staring at him now, a warning gleaming in her eyes, daring him to say something. But Jaden couldn't stay silent anymore. He had to protect his dad, no matter what. "Wait," Jaden's voice cut through the silence, trembling but loud enough to stop the ceremony in its tracks. A collective gasp echoed through the church. All eyes turned to him, and Marcus looked down, his smile fading into confusion. "Jaden," he asked softly, kneeling down beside his son. "What's wrong, buddy?" Jaden's hands shook, his voice barely steady as he tried to speak. "Dad, you can't marry her. She's not who you think she is." The silence in the room was deafening. Tanisha's smile froze, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she stared at Jaden, her mask slipping just enough for him to see the anger behind it. As the shocked murmurs rippled through the church, Jaden felt his heart pound against his chest. The weight of the moment pressed down on him as he stood there, face to face with his father and the woman who had slowly turned his life upside down. Marcus, his expression caught between confusion and concern, gently placed his hands on Jaden's shoulders. "Jaden, what are you talking about?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but strained. He glanced around the room nervously, aware of the 100 pairs of eyes staring at them. Tanisha stood frozen, her perfect smile now replaced by a look of bewilderment and thinly veiled annoyance. Jaden could feel all eyes on him, and he wanted to run, to hide from the scrutiny. but he knew there was no turning back now. His father needed to know the truth. I overheard her, Jaden stammered, glancing quickly at Tanisha before focusing on his father's concerned face. She's been lying to you, Dad. I heard her talking on the phone about money and some kind of insurance policy. She's planning something bad. A hush fell over the church as his words sank in. Marcus's brow furrowed in confusion. Insurance policy? Jaden, you must be mistaken. Why would Tanisha? Before he could finish, Tanisha stepped forward, her voice soft and soothing, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of coldness. Sweetheart, she said, directing her gaze at Jaden. I know this is a big change for you. It's normal to feel scared when your family changes, but this isn't the way to express that fear. She turned to Marcus, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Marcus, he's just nervous. It's a lot for a young boy to handle me becoming his stepmom and all. I think we should talk about this later, in private. Jaden's hands balled into fists. How could she stand there so calm, lying through her teeth in front of everyone? He looked up at his father, willing him to see the truth, to understand that this wasn't just about nerves or fear of change. Dad, please listen to me, Jaden begged, his voice shaking with desperation. I heard her. She was talking to someone named Derek about the insurance money. They're planning to do something to you after the wedding. Marcus's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time he looked genuinely unsettled. He turned to Tanisha, searching her face for any sign that Jaden's words could be true. Tanisha, Marcus said quietly, what is he talking about? Is there any truth to this? Tanisha's expression hardened ever so slightly. Marcus, you can't seriously be listening to this, she snapped, her calm demeanor slipping just enough for Jaden to see the sharp edge of frustration in her eyes. He's a child. Children have vivid imaginations, you know that. He's probably just feeling insecure about the wedding about us. He doesn't mean it. But Marcus didn't look convinced. His gaze shifted between Jaden's pleading eyes and Tanisha's increasingly defensive stance. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment it felt like the entire world had stopped, holding its breath. Jaden's heart raced. He couldn't let Tanisha talk her way out of this. He had to make his father see what was really going on. Taking a deep breath, he reached for his phone, pulling it out of his pocket. Dad, I have proof, he said, his voice trembling but determined. I took pictures of her messages. She's been texting Derek planning something. He quickly unlocked his phone and opened the photos he had secretly taken from Tanisha's phone when she wasn't paying attention. He held the screen up to his father, showing him the string of texts between Tanisha and a man named Derek. The messages spoke of finalizing the policy, the payout, and sticking to the plan. One message from Tanisha read, after the wedding, we're set. Marcus won't see it coming. Marcus's face went pale as he read the words on the screen. He blinked, as though trying to process what he was seeing. But the evidence was undeniable. His hands shook as he scrolled through the messages, his heart sinking with every new detail. Tanisha, what is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no anger in his tone, just shock and hurt. Tanisha's face twisted with frustration. For a moment she seemed caught off guard, not expecting Jaden to have such solid proof. But her hesitation was brief. She quickly composed herself, putting on a facade. Marcus, this is ridiculous, she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. That's not what you think it is. Derek is a friend of mine. He's the wedding planner. We were talking about the insurance policy for the wedding in case something happened during the ceremony, not whatever Jaden's talking about. He's just confused. Marcus hesitated, torn between the love he felt for Tanisha and the unsettling evidence Jaden had just shown him. He turned to his son, his expression pained. Jaden, are you sure about this? Could you have misunderstood? Jaden felt a lump form in his throat. He knew his father wanted to believe Tanisha, wanted to believe that everything was fine. But Jaden also knew what he had heard and seen. I'm sure. Dad, he said, his voice steady despite the fear swirling inside him. She's been mean to me for months. She only acts nice when you're around, but when you're not, she's different. She doesn't care about us, Dad. She's using you. Tanisha's eyes flashed with anger. She stepped forward, glaring at Jaden with a look that sent a chill down his spine. You little brat, she hissed, forgetting the audience around her. You've been spying on me, trying to ruin everything. A collective gasp ran through the church as Tanisha's mask slipped for the first time, revealing the cold, manipulative side Jaden had known all along. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the woman he had planned to marry unravel in front of him. Tanisha, Marcus said, his voice trembling, how could you? Realizing her mistake, Tanisha quickly backpedaled, forcing a tight smile. Marcus, you have to understand, this has all been a misunderstanding. I was just stressed about the wedding, that's all. Jaden, he's confused. I would never hurt you. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He stared at the woman standing before him, the truth finally sinking in. He had been so blinded by love that he had missed all the signs, ignored his son's concerns, and trusted someone who was only using him for her own gain. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he looked down at Jaden, who was standing there, small and scared, but brave enough to speak up when no one else would. "I'm sorry, son," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have listened to you." Jaden shook his head, blinking back tears of his own. "It's okay, Dad," he said softly. "I just didn't want anything bad to happen to you." The church was silent now, the guests watching in stunned disbelief as the perfect wedding crumbled before their eyes. Some whispered among themselves. Others looked on with sympathy for Marcus and Jaden, but no one knew what to say. Marcus straightened up, his expression hardening as he turned back to Tanisha. "I think you should leave," he said, his voice cold and steady. Tanisha's face twisted in anger. "Marcus, you can't be serious. You're really going to believe this child over me?" "I believe my son," Marcus said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I don't know who you really are, Tanisha, but I know I can't trust you." Tanisha's composure shattered completely, her face contorted with fury as she realized that her plan had fallen apart. Without another word, she turned and stormed down the aisle, her white dress billowing behind her as she pushed through the doors of the church and disappeared into the sunlight. The room remained still, everyone too shocked to move or speak. Marcus stood there for a moment, staring at the doors where Tanisha had just fled. He felt a heavy weight in his chest, a mix of relief and heartbreak. Slowly, he turned back to Jaden, kneeling down to pull his son into a tight hug. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. "You saved me." Jaden hugged his father back, feeling the tension slowly leave his body. "I just wanted to protect you," he whispered. "I know," Marcus replied, his voice full of gratitude and sorrow. "And you did." For a moment, it was just the two of them, father and son, united in the face of betrayal. The chaos of the church faded into the background as they held each other, knowing that their bond had only grown stronger through everything that had happened. Finally, Marcus stood, his arm wrapped protectively around Jaden's shoulders. He turned to the guests, who were still staring, unsure of what to do. "I'm sorry, everyone," Marcus said quietly, his voice full of weariness. "There won't be a wedding today." The guests nodded, some murmuring words of support, others quickly gathering their things to leave. One by one, they filed out of the church, leaving Marcus and Jaden alone at the front of the altar. As the last guest disappeared, Marcus let out a long, shaky breath. He looked down at Jaden, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and pride. "Let's go home, son," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We've had enough excitement for one day." Jaden nodded, relieved that it was finally over. The weight of the secret he had been carrying for so long had finally lifted, and though the future was uncertain, he knew that he and his father would face it together. As Marcus and Jaden left the now quiet church, the tension that had built over the past few weeks seemed to finally start to lift. The cool afternoon air felt like a sharp contrast to the heat of the emotions that had boiled over inside the church. Marcus still had his arm around Jaden, his grip firm but protective, as if he were afraid to let go. Jaden, though relieved that the truth had finally come out, couldn't shake the lingering anxiety that clung to him. What would happen now? They walked silently toward Marcus's car, parked a short distance from the church. The parking lot, which had been buzzing with guests and wedding preparations just hours before, now felt eerily empty. Jaden glanced up at his father, whose face was still pale, his eyes distant. He hadn't said much since Tanisha stormed out, and Jaden worried about what was going through his father's mind. Marcus always seemed so strong, so sure of himself, but now he looked fragile, almost like he was crumbling under the weight of what had just happened. When they reached the car, Marcus fumbled with the keys for a moment, his hands shaking. Jaden climbed into the passenger seat, watching as his father slid into the driver's side and stared blankly at the steering wheel for what felt like an eternity. "Dad," Jaden asked hesitantly, breaking the heavy silence that had settled between them. "Are you okay?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He let out a long, shaky breath before turning to look at his son. His eyes were red, as if he were fighting back tears. "I don't know, Jaden," he said quietly. "I'm not sure how to feel right now. Everything just fell apart." Jaden's stomach twisted with guilt. He knew that exposing Tanisha was the right thing to do. It had to be done. But seeing his father like this, so heartbroken and lost, made him wonder if he had ruined Morsedev. "I'm sorry, Dad," Jaden mumbled, staring down at his hands. "I didn't want to ruin your big day. I couldn't let you marry her." Marcus's gaze softened, and he reached over to place a hand on Jaden's shoulder. "No, Jaden, don't apologize. You did the right thing. I'm the one who should be sorry. I should have listened to you sooner." Jaden looked up, surprised. "But you didn't know. I didn't even tell you everything until today." "I should have paid more attention," Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. "You've been trying to tell me for weeks, haven't you? I just didn't want to see it. I wanted to believe Tanisha was the person she pretended to be. I thought I could finally give you a family again." Jaden felt a lump rise in his throat as he listened to his father's words. He had always known that Marcus wanted to move on to find happiness after Jaden's mother had passed away, but he hadn't realized just how much pressure his father had been under. Marcus wasn't just looking for a new partner for himself, he was trying to rebuild something for both of them, to fill the void that had been left in their lives. "I didn't need another mom," Jaden whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I just needed you." For a moment, Marcus sat still, his hand still resting on Jaden's shoulder. Then, with a deep sigh, he pulled Jaden into a tight embrace. Jaden could feel his father's chest rise and fall, and he could hear the faint sound of tears in Marcus's voice when he finally spoke. "I love you, son," Marcus said, his words barely a whisper. "You're the most important thing in the world to me, and I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you sooner. I wanted to believe everything was going to be okay." Jaden buried his face in his father's chest, feeling the warmth of the embrace wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe. Tanisha was gone, her plan exposed, and it was just him and his dad again. No lies, no secrets, just the two of them. After a few minutes, Marcus gently pulled away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He cleared his throat and glanced at the car's dashboard. "Come on," he said, forcing a small smile. "Let's go home. We'll figure out the rest later." The drive home was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the heavy silence that had filled the car earlier. Jaden leaned his head against the window, watching the familiar streets pass by, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift off his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but for now he was content just to be with his dad. When they pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, but now it felt different. Without Tanisha's presence looming over them, the house felt more like home again. As they stepped inside, the familiar scent of their living room, a mix of Marcus's cologne and the faint smell of the lavender candles Jaden's mom used to love, greeted them. Marcus tossed his keys onto the hallway table and rubbed his temples. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, shaking his head. "There's so much to unpack. So many things I didn't see." "We'll figure it out," Jaden said, trying to sound reassuring even though he wasn't entirely sure how they would do that. But the important thing was that they were together. Marcus nodded, then headed into the kitchen. "How about we order some pizza?" he asked, glancing back at Jaden. "I think we both deserve a little comfort food after today."
Jaden's face brightened. "Stuffed crust."
Marcus chuckled, the sound lighter than it had been all day. "Yes, stuffed crust. Whatever you want, buddy." As Marcus grabbed the phone to order dinner, Jaden wandered into the living room and sat down on the couch, sinking into the soft cushions. For the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe again. But even though the immediate danger had passed, he couldn't shake the questions swirling in his mind. What if Tanisha came back? What if she and Derek tried to hurt his dad again? What if? The sound of the doorbell snapped him out of his thoughts. Jaden jumped up, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't expected any visitors after everything that had happened. He glanced toward the kitchen, where Marcus was still on the phone with the pizza place. "I'll get it," Jaden called out, hoping to avoid worrying his dad. He hurried to the front door and opened it just a crack, peeking outside. Standing on the porch was a tall, well-dressed man with a serious expression. He had dark skin and a closely trimmed beard, and his eyes were hidden behind a pair of sunglasses. Jaden's heart raced as he quickly realized this wasn't someone he recognized from the wedding earlier. "Hi," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "Is Marcus home? I need to speak with him. It's important." Jaden hesitated, his hand tightening on the door handle. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wallet, flipping it open to reveal a badge. "Detective Harris," he said. "I'm with the local police department. I'm here to talk to your father about Tanisha Walker." Jaden's stomach flipped at the mention of her name. How did the police know about Tanisha already? He hadn't told anyone except his dad, and Marcus hadn't had time to make any calls since they left the church. Before Jaden could respond, Marcus appeared in the hallway, having overheard the conversation. "Detective Harris," he asked, stepping forward and pulling Jaden back protectively. "What's this about? Is Tanisha in some kind of trouble?" Detective Harris gave a small nod. "I'm afraid so, Mr. Johnson. Can I come in? It's best we discuss this inside." Marcus glanced at Jaden, who looked up at him with wide eyes, then nodded and stepped aside to let the detective in. They all moved into the living room, and Marcus gestured for the detective to sit down. Jaden hovered nearby, still on edge from everything that had happened earlier. Detective Harris sat down in the armchair, his face serious but calm. He removed his sunglasses and placed them in his jacket pocket before speaking. "I've been investigating Tanisha Walker for a while now," he began. "She's been involved in several similar cases across the state, meeting men, getting close to them, and then using them for financial gain. The last man she was involved with ended up in the hospital after what was made to look like an accident, but we suspect it was much more than that." Marcus paled, his hand instinctively tightening on the arm of the couch. I had no idea. I didn't think. She's very good at hiding her intentions, Detective Harris continued. Most of the men she's been involved with never see it coming. But it looks like your son was able to uncover her plans before things got worse. Jaden blinked, feeling a mix of relief and pride. He had known something was off about Tanisha, but hearing the detective confirm that she had been a danger all along made it all feel more real and more terrifying. We believe she was planning to collect on a life insurance policy after staging some kind of accident, the detective explained. Does that sound familiar? Marcus nodded slowly, his face grim. She talked about increasing my life insurance policy just last month. She said it was to make sure Jaden would be taken care of if anything happened to me. Detective Harris nodded. That's part of her usual scheme. She makes it seem like she's looking out for your family's best interests, but in reality, she's setting the stage for something much more sinister. You're lucky your son caught on to her when he did. Jaden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't realized just how close they had come to disaster. The idea that Tanisha could have hurt his father or worse made his stomach turn. So what happens now? Marcus asked, his voice tense. Is she going to be arrested? We're working on it, Detective Harris said. We have enough evidence to charge her with fraud and attempted murder, but she's already on the run. We've put out an alert and we'll find her, but it might take some time. Marcus leaned back, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe I didn't see it, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. I trusted her. I almost. It's not your fault, Mr. Johnson, Detective Harris said gently. People like her are very good at what they do. They know how to manipulate their victims. The important thing is that you and your son are safe now. Marcus nodded, though the guilt still weighed heavily on him. He looked over at Jaden, who was sitting quietly on the couch, his eyes downcast. Jaden, Marcus said softly, you saved me today. You did something really brave, and I can't thank you enough. Jaden looked up, meeting his father's gaze. He didn't know what to say. It felt strange to be called brave when all he had done was tell the truth, but he knew it had been the right thing to do. Detective Harris stood, slipping his sunglasses back on. I'll keep you updated on the investigation, he said. In the meantime, just be careful. If she tries to contact you, call us right away. Marcus shook the detective's hand, his grip firm. Thank you, Detective. I appreciate everything you're doing. After the detective left, the house felt strangely quiet. Marcus and Jaden sat together on the couch, neither of them saying much. But the weight of what had just been revealed hung over them both. Tanisha was gone, but the damage she had caused would take time to heal. Jaden leaned against his father, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. Despite everything, they had made it through together, and that, more than anything, was what mattered. The days following the chaotic wedding day were tense and surreal. Jaden and Marcus tried to settle back into their regular routines, but nothing felt the same. The revelation about Tanisha and her cruel plan hung over them like a dark cloud, casting a shadow on every moment of their lives. Though Tanisha was gone, the fear of what could have happened and the uncertainty of what might happen next weighed heavily on them both. Jaden, who had always been an energetic and curious boy, found himself becoming more withdrawn. He no longer rushed to meet his friends after school or spend his afternoons playing video games. Instead, he stayed in his room, quietly doing homework or staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of Tanisha. Despite Detective Harris's assurances that Tanisha was on the run and that they were actively searching for her, Jaden couldn't shake the fear that she might come back. Every creak in the house made him jump, and every time the phone rang or someone knocked at the door, his heart raced. Marcus, too, was struggling. He tried to keep up a brave front for Jaden, but inside he was battling his own feelings of guilt and betrayal. He couldn't believe how easily he had been deceived, how blind he had been to Tanisha's true intentions. The thought that he had almost let her into their lives permanently, had almost married her, haunted him. Worse, he had ignored Jaden's warnings. He had dismissed his son's fears and brushed off his concerns, too focused on his own happiness to see what was happening right in front of him. The nights were the hardest for both of them. Jaden often woke up from nightmares, images of Tanisha and the mysterious Derek looming in his mind. In his dreams, they would come back, more dangerous than ever, determined to finish what they had started. Sometimes he dreamed that Tanisha had succeeded, that his father had been taken from him, and he was left alone in a dark, empty house. Jaden would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, and rush to his father's room just to make sure he was still there. Marcus, on the other hand, lay awake for hours at a time, staring at the ceiling as guilt gnawed at him. He replayed every moment with Tanisha in his mind, trying to pinpoint when he had missed the signs. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed as a father. Jaden had needed him to protect their family, and he had almost let danger walk right through the front door. One particularly difficult night, Jaden woke up from another nightmare, his body shaking with fear. He didn't even think twice before rushing down the hallway to Marcus's room. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the knob. He didn't want to seem like a baby. He knew his dad was going through his own struggles, but he couldn't help it. The fear was overwhelming. Finally, he pushed the door open. Marcus was sitting up in bed, his back against the headboard, staring into the darkness. His eyes were bloodshot, and there were deep circles under them as though he hadn't slept in days. When he saw Jaden standing in the doorway, he gave a tired, sad smile. "Another nightmare?" Marcus asked softly, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Jaden nodded, stepping into the room. I just wanted to check on you," he whispered, trying to hide the shakiness in his voice. Marcus patted the bed beside him, and Jaden climbed up, sitting close to his father. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. They just sat there in the quiet, finding comfort in each other's presence. "I'm sorry, Dad," Jaden said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus frowned and looked down at him. "Sorry. For what, Jaden?" "For ruining the wedding," Jaden mumbled, his eyes fixed on the blanket. "I know you really liked Tanisha, and I didn't want to mess everything up, but I just couldn't let you marry her. I didn't want her to hurt you." Marcus's heart ached at his son's words. He gently pulled Jaden closer, wrapping an arm around him. "You didn't ruin anything, Jaden," he said firmly. "You saved me. You saved both of us." Jaden looked up at him, his eyes filled with doubt. "But you were so happy with her. I thought maybe I was just being selfish because I didn't want you to forget about Mom. Maybe that's why I didn't like her." Marcus's expression softened and he sighed. "Jaden, no one could ever replace your mom. No one. I think I just wanted to move forward to give you a better life. I thought bringing someone like Tanisha into our lives would make everything easier for us, but I was wrong." Jaden rested his head on Marcus's shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his father's presence. "I miss Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I miss her too," Marcus said softly. "Every day." They sat in silence again, both lost in their memories of the woman they had lost. Jaden had been so young when his mother passed away, but the memories he had of her were vivid and filled with warmth. She had been kind and patient, always making time for him, no matter how busy she was. Jaden had loved sitting in the kitchen while she cooked, watching her move around with a gentle smile on her face. He remembered the way her laugh filled the room, making everything feel safe and warm. For Marcus, the memories were both a comfort and a source of deep pain. He remembered how strong his wife had been, how she had always known exactly what to do in any situation. Losing her had left a hole in his life, one that he had desperately tried to fill with his relationship with Tanisha. But now, looking back, he realized that no one could ever fill that void. He had to accept that and focus on what was most important, Jaden. After a while, Marcus spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, Jaden, you were right about Tanisha. I didn't want to see it, but you saw her for who she really was. I was so focused on trying to make things work that I ignored what was really going on. And for that, I'm sorry." Jaden shook his head. "It's not your fault, Dad. She tricked both of us." Marcus smiled faintly. "Still, I should have listened to you sooner. You're a smart kid, Jaden. You've always had a good sense of what's right and wrong. I should have trusted that." Jaden didn't respond, but he felt a little better hearing his father's words. They stayed like that for a while, the weight of the conversation slowly easing off their shoulders. Eventually, Marcus glanced at the clock on his nightstand and let out a small sigh. "It's late," he said softly. "Why don't you stay in here tonight? We could both use the company." Jaden nodded gratefully, lying down beside his father and pulling the blanket up to his chin. It wasn't long before the soft, steady rhythm of Marcus's breathing lulled him into a peaceful sleep, free of nightmares for the first time in days. The next morning, they both woke up feeling a little more rested, though the lingering weight of everything that had happened still hung over them. Marcus made breakfast pancakes, Jaden's favorite, and they ate in relative silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound in the room. After they finished, Marcus sat down across from Jaden at the kitchen table, his face serious but calm. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "I think it might be a good idea for us to go away for a little while. Get out of the house, away from everything that's happened. We could use a break." Jaden looked up, surprised. "Go away? Like a trip?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, just a short trip, maybe to the beach. We could get away from everything and just focus on us for a while. What do you think?" Jaden thought about it for a moment. The idea of leaving the house, leaving the memories of Tanisha behind, sounded like exactly what they needed. "That sounds good, Dad," he said with a small smile.
"Great," Marcus said, returning the smile. "I'll start looking into places we can go. We'll make it a fun trip. Just the two of us."
For the first time in what felt like weeks, Jaden felt a flicker of excitement. A trip with his dad, just like old times. It was exactly what they needed to heal from everything they had been through. Over the next few days, Marcus made arrangements for their trip. booking a small beachside cabin a few hours away. As they packed their bags, the mood in the house lightened. The thought of leaving behind the stress and fear gave both Marcus and Jaden something to look forward to, something positive to focus on. Finally, the day arrived and they loaded up the car, ready for their mini vacation. As they drove away from the house, Jaden felt a sense of relief wash over him. He watched the familiar streets pass by, the city slowly giving way to highways and open fields. The further they got from home, the lighter he felt. They arrived at the beach in the late afternoon, the sun beginning to set over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the water. The sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air, and the salty breeze was refreshing and calming. Jaden could already feel the tension easing from his body as he and Marcus unpacked their things in the cozy little cabin. That evening, they took a walk along the beach, the cool sand beneath their feet and the ocean stretching out endlessly before them. For the first time in weeks, Jaden felt like a normal kid again, free from the weight of fear and suspicion. He and Marcus talked about everything and nothing, their conversation light and easy just like it used to be. As they walked, Jaden glanced up at his father, feeling a sense of gratitude that he hadn't been able to put into words before. "Thanks for bringing me here, Dad," he said quietly. Marcus smiled down at him. "Of course, buddy, we both needed this." And for the first time since the wedding day, Jaden truly believed that everything was going to be okay. The days spent at the beach felt like a much-needed breath of fresh air for both Jaden and Marcus. For the first time in weeks, they could relax without constantly looking over their shoulders or jumping at every sound. The small cabin they had rented was cozy, nestled between a row of palm trees and facing the ocean. Every morning, they would wake to the sound of waves gently crashing against the shore. And each evening, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and orange. Jaden found himself laughing again, something he hadn't done in what felt like forever. He and Marcus spent their days swimming in the ocean, building sand castles, and eating ice cream from the small stand down the road. They played board games at night and fell asleep to the calming sound of the ocean breeze. For the first time in a long while, it felt like they were normal again, just father and son, enjoying each other's company without the weight of fear hanging over them. Marcus seemed lighter too. Jaden could see the change in him, a sense of relief that came from being away from everything that had happened. He smiled more, told more of his old corny jokes, and even tried surfing, much to Jaden's amusement. The trip was exactly what they both needed. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sunset, Marcus glanced over at Jaden. "You know," he said, his voice calm but serious, "I think this trip was the best decision we've made in a while." Jaden smiled, nodding. "Yeah, me too. I don't think I've felt this relaxed in. I don't even know how long." Marcus chuckled softly. "Me neither, buddy," he paused, then continued, his voice more thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot since we got here, about everything that happened with Tanisha." Jaden tensed a little at the mention of her name. The memories of the wedding and the events leading up to it still fresh in his mind, despite the peace they had found at the beach. But he didn't say anything, waiting for his father to continue. "I know it's been hard for both of us," Marcus said, turning to look at the horizon. "And I want you to know that I'm sorry. I should have listened to you from the start. I got so caught up in wanting to be happy again, in wanting to rebuild our lives, that I didn't pay attention to the signs. I put you in danger, and that's something I'll never forgive myself for." Jaden shook his head, feeling a tightness in his chest. "Dad, it's not your fault. You didn't know, Tanisha. She fooled both of us. I didn't see it right away either." "I should have known better," Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have protected you better." Jaden swallowed hard, hating to see his father so burdened with guilt. "You did protect me, Dad," he said softly. "You've always protected me. And when it really mattered, we both figured it out. We got through it together." Marcus glanced at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I'm proud of you, Jaden. You showed more courage than I ever did. You didn't back down, even when you were scared." Jaden felt a warmth spread through his chest at his father's words. He had been terrified that day, standing up in front of the entire church, but he knew he had done the right thing. Hearing his father say that he was proud of him made it all worth it. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the waves roll in and out, the orange glow of the sunset reflecting off the water. Jaden felt a sense of peace wash over him, but there was still something nagging at the back of his mind. Despite the calm, despite the distance from home, he couldn't shake the feeling that Tanisha wasn't gone for good. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Jaden asked quietly, breaking the silence. Marcus's expression tightened, and he sighed deeply. "I don't know, Jaden," he admitted. "The police are still looking for her, and Detective Harris said they're doing everything they can. But people like Tanisha, they know how to disappear when they want to." Jaden nodded, his stomach sinking a little. He had hoped for a more reassuring answer, but deep down, he knew his father was right. Tanisha had vanished after the wedding, slipping away before the police could arrest her. And while he wanted to believe she was far away, never to return, there was always that lingering fear in the back of his mind that one day she'd come back for revenge. "We just have to be careful," Marcus added, sensing his son's unease. "We'll stay in touch with the police, and we'll be ready if she ever tries to come back. But for now, we can't live in fear. We've got to keep moving forward." Jaden nodded, trying to take comfort in his father's words. Moving forward. That's what they needed to do. Tanisha had already taken enough from them. They couldn't let her take their piece too. That night, Jaden slept soundly, the rhythmic sound of the waves lulling him into a deep sleep. But even as he dreamed, the shadow of Tanisha lingered in his mind, a reminder that the danger wasn't fully behind them yet. Underscore, 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 underscore. The next few days passed peacefully. Jaden and Marcus continued to enjoy their time at the beach, exploring nearby trails, playing in the sand, and eating far too many popsicles. They tried to keep their minds off everything that had happened back home, focusing instead on enjoying the present moment. It felt like they were slowly healing bit by bit. But on the fourth day of their trip, things started to shift. It was late in the afternoon, and they had just returned from a long hike along the cliffs that overlooked the ocean. Jaden was tired but happy, his muscles sore from the walk, but his mind refreshed by the salty breeze and the stunning views. They were planning to spend the evening at a seafood restaurant in town, a treat Marcus had promised after a week of mostly fast food and snacks. As they entered the cabin, Jaden noticed Marcus's phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. He picked it up and glanced at the screen. "Dad, Detective Harris is calling," Jaden said, handing the phone to Marcus. Marcus's expression shifted slightly as he took the phone, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "I'll take it outside," he said, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind him. Jaden watched his father through the window, seeing the way Marcus's face tightened as he listened to whatever the detective was telling him. It was hard to make out the words, but from the look on Marcus's face, Jaden could tell that it wasn't good news. A few minutes later, Marcus re-entered the cabin, his expression grim. "That was Detective Harris," he said, running a hand through his hair. Jaden felt a knot form in his stomach. "What did he say? Did they find her?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet, but there's been some activity with one of her accounts. She withdrew a large sum of money from a bank up north. The police think she's trying to leave the country." Jaden's heart sank. "So she's still out there?" "She's still out there," Marcus confirmed, his voice heavy. "But Harris said they're closing in on her. They've alerted Border Patrol and airport security. It's only a matter of time before they catch her." Jaden nodded, trying to stay hopeful. But the news that Tanisha was still out there, still free, made it hard to relax. The fear that had been slowly fading over the past few days came rushing back, tightening its grip on him. Marcus sat down beside him, his face serious but calm. "Listen, Jaden, I know this is scary, but I promise you we're going to be okay. We've got people looking out for us. The police are doing everything they can, and we'll be safe here." Jaden looked up at his father, searching for any hint of doubt in his eyes, but found none. Marcus was trying to be strong for him, to reassure him, even though Jaden could tell that he was just as worried. "I trust you," Dad, Jaden said quietly. Marcus smiled faintly. "Good, and I trust you too, kiddo. We'll get through this, just like we always do." They spent the rest of the evening quietly, both of them more subdued than they had been earlier in the trip. The excitement of the restaurant outing had faded, replaced by a mutual sense of unease. The conversation with Detective Harris had reminded them both that, despite the distance they had put between themselves and home, the threat of Tanisha still lingered. That night, as Jaden lay in bed, the familiar sound of the ocean couldn't fully calm his nerves. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, Tanisha, standing at the front of the church, her eyes cold and calculating, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she tried to convince everyone that Jaden was just an over-imaginative child. He couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if he hadn't spoken up. If he had stayed silent, would his father still be safe? Or would Tanisha have followed through with her plan, leaving him alone and devastated? Sleep didn't come easily that night. Jaden tossed and turned, his mind filled with questions and fears. But despite the uncertainty that still loomed, he knew one thing for sure. As long as he and his dad were together, they would find a way to get through this. And no matter what happened next, Jaden was determined to stay strong for both of them. The next morning started like any other day on their beach vacation. The sun was shining brightly through the cabin windows, and the ocean waves created a calming rhythm in the background. Jaden woke up to the smell of breakfast cooking. Marcus was making pancakes again, something he did whenever he wanted to make things feel normal. Jaden yawned and stretched, momentarily forgetting the tension that had settled between them the previous evening after the phone call with Detective Harris. But as soon as he sat up in bed, the uneasy feeling crept back in. Tanisha was still out there somewhere, and the fear that she could show up unexpectedly gnawed at him. He shook the thoughts away, trying to focus on the present. They were on vacation, they were far from home, and they were supposed to be enjoying themselves. He wouldn't let the shadow of Tanisha ruin their time here. Jaden wandered into the kitchen, where Marcus was flipping pancakes with a surprisingly relaxed expression. "Morning," Champ Marcus greeted with a smile that seemed forced but genuine. "Morning," Dad Jaden mumbled as he sat at the kitchen table, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He looked around the small kitchen, trying to appreciate the peace of their little cabin. It was cozy, with light wooden walls and big windows that let in the fresh ocean air. The thought of leaving this peaceful retreat and returning to the reality they had fled from made his stomach twist with anxiety. As they ate breakfast, Jaden kept stealing glances at his father. Marcus was trying to keep the conversation light, talking about how they could spend the day at a nearby amusement park or go for another hike. But Jaden could see through it. His dad's eyes were tired, and the lines of worry etched in his face were deeper than usual. Jaden poked at his pancakes, his appetite dulled by the swirling thoughts in his mind. "Do you think they'll catch her soon?" he asked, breaking the casual flow of conversation. Marcus paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly and met Jaden's gaze. "I think so," he said, though his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. "Detective Harris said they're getting close. We just have to stay calm and let the police handle it." Jaden nodded, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He wanted to believe his father, but something told him that Tanisha wasn't the type to just run away and disappear. She was smart, cunning, and dangerous, and after everything that had happened, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done with them yet. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully. They spent a few hours lounging by the beach, building sand castles and swimming in the clear blue water. It was almost enough to make Jaden forget about the looming threat. Almost. But as the afternoon wore on, the peaceful rhythm of their vacation was suddenly shattered. It started with a knock on the door. Jaden and Marcus were sitting on the porch, enjoying the cool ocean breeze when the knock echoed through the cabin. Marcus frowned, glancing at his phone. He wasn't expecting anyone. They hadn't told anyone where they were, except for Detective Harris. "I'll get it," Marcus said, standing up and walking toward the door. Jaden's stomach flipped with a sudden sense of dread, though he didn't know why. It was probably just a neighbor or someone who worked at the resort, but as Marcus opened the door, Jaden saw his father's entire body stiffen. Standing on the porch was Tanisha. She was dressed casually, in jeans and a jacket, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail, but the cold look in her eyes was unmistakable. She stood there, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, as though this were the most normal thing in the world. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice calm and smooth. "Miss me?" For a moment, Marcus stood frozen in shock, his hand gripping the doorknob so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jaden, still sitting on the porch, felt his breath catch in his throat. He had imagined this moment countless times, but seeing Tanisha standing there in the flesh sent a jolt of fear through his body. "How did you find us?" Marcus finally managed to say, his voice tight with disbelief. Tanisha tilted her head, her smile widening just a fraction. "You didn't think I'd let you slip away that easily, did you?" she said, her tone almost mocking. "You left in such a hurry, Marcus. We have unfinished business." Marcus took a step back, his protective instincts kicking in as he glanced over his shoulder at Jaden. "You need to leave," he said firmly, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what you're doing here, but you're not welcome." Tanisha's smile faltered slightly, but she didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward, her eyes flicking briefly to Jaden before returning to Marcus. "We both know that's not how this is going to work, Marcus," she said softly. "I didn't come all this way just to turn around and leave." Jaden's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to yell, to scream for help, but his throat felt like it was closing up. He looked at his father, who was standing tall, trying to remain calm, but Jaden could see the tension in his posture. "Tanisha," leave, Marcus said again, more forcefully this time. "The police are looking for you. You need to get out of here before you make things worse for yourself." Tanisha laughed softly, a sound that sent a shiver down Jaden's spine. "The police," she echoed, as though the idea amused her. "You really think the police are going to help you? Marcus, they don't care about us. They'll never catch me. I'm too good at this." Marcus clenched his jaw. "This isn't a game, Tanisha. Since you tried to kill me, you tricked me into trusting you. and now you're trying to ruin our lives. I won't let you get anywhere near Jaden." At the mention of Jaden's name, Tanisha's eyes darkened. "Oh, Jaden," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You're a little hero. He's the reason all of this fell apart, isn't he? If it weren't for him, we'd be on our honeymoon right now." Jaden's hands balled into fists, his fear momentarily replaced by anger. He had known all along that she hated him, that everything she had done was part of some twisted plan to get what she wanted. But hearing her say it out loud made it feel even more real, more dangerous. Marcus took another step forward, blocking Tanisha's view of Jaden. "You're not going to hurt my son," he said through gritted teeth. "You need to leave now before I call the police." Tanisha's expression hardened, and for a moment the cold mask she had been wearing slipped, revealing the true depth of her anger. "You think you can just walk away from me?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think you can just start over and pretend like none of this ever happened? I've spent too much time on this. I won't let you throw it all away." Jaden's heart raced as he watched the confrontation unfold. He could see the danger in Tanisha's eyes, the way her whole body seemed coiled with tension like a predator ready to strike. He knew she wasn't going to leave quietly. Before Marcus could respond, Tanisha lunged forward, pushing past him and into the cabin. Jaden jumped to his feet, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. He watched in horror as Tanisha stormed into the small living room, her eyes wild with anger. "Get out," Marcus shouted, grabbing her arm and trying to pull her back toward the door. "I won't let you do this." But Tanisha twisted out of his grip, shoving him away with surprising force. Marcus stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the kitchen counter. "You're going to regret this, Marcus," she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "You're going to regret everything." Jaden's body finally moved, and he rushed to his father's side, his hands trembling. "Dad, we have to call the police," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone, but before he could dial, Tanisha lunged again, knocking the phone out of his hand. It hit the floor with a loud crack, skidding across the tiles. Enough, Tanisha screamed, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're not going to win, Marcus. You think you can just take everything from me." For a split second, everything seemed to slow down. Jaden's heart pounded in his ears as he watched his father try to wrestle with Tanisha, both of them locked in a desperate struggle. He wanted to help, wanted to do something, but he felt frozen, helpless in the face of the chaos. And then suddenly there was a loud crash as Tanisha grabbed a glass vase from the kitchen counter and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass flying everywhere. Jaden flinched, his body recoiling instinctively from the sound, and he felt a sharp sting on his arm as a piece of glass grazed him. "Jaden, get out of here," Marcus shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Go now." Jaden didn't need to be told twice. He turned and bolted for the front door, his heart hammering in his chest. He could hear the sound of Marcus and Tanisha struggling behind him, but he forced himself to keep moving, his feet pounding against the wooden floor as he ran outside. The bright sunlight hit him as he burst out onto the porch, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind was racing, his thoughts a blur of fear and adrenaline. He had to find help. He had to get the police. Jaden spotted a group of people walking along the beach a short distance away. Without thinking, he sprinted toward them, waving his arms frantically. "Help," he shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. "Please, we need help." The group turned toward him, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. One of the men stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jaden's panicked expression. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "My dad," Jaden gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "She's trying to hurt him. Please, we need the police." The man didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his voice steady as he explained the situation to the dispatcher. Jaden stood there, trembling, watching the cabin in the distance, praying that his father was okay. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder as they approached. Jaden's heart pounded in his chest as a police car pulled up in front of the cabin, followed closely by another. Officers jumped out of their vehicles, guns drawn, as they rushed toward the house. Jaden stood frozen in place, his body shaking with fear and adrenaline. He couldn't see what was happening inside the cabin, but he could hear the muffled sounds of shouting and the crashing of furniture. His mind raced with images of Tanisha, her face twisted with rage, her hands clenched into fists. He feared the worst. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the front door of the cabin burst open and two officers emerged, dragging a struggling Tanisha in handcuffs. She was screaming, thrashing against their grip, but they held her tightly, forcing her toward the police car. Jaden's breath caught in his throat as he watched her being shoved into the back of the vehicle, her eyes wild with fury as she glared at him through the window. Even though she was handcuffed, even though the police had her, Jaden still felt a shiver of fear run down his spine. And then, from the front door of the cabin, Marcus appeared, his shirt torn and his face pale, but otherwise unharmed. He spotted Jaden standing with the group of people by the beach and immediately rushed toward him, his expression filled with relief. Jaden, Marcus called, his voice shaking as he reached his son and pulled him into a tight embrace. "You're okay." Jaden buried his face in his father's chest, his whole body trembling as the reality of what had just happened hit him. "I was so scared," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know," Marcus said softly, holding him close. "I know, but it's over now. She's gone." For the first time since the nightmare had started, Jaden felt a sense of relief wash over him. Tanisha was gone, really gone, and they were finally safe. But even as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Jaden knew that the road to healing would be long. The fear and uncertainty might have faded, but the scars of what they had been through would take time to heal. Still, they had each other, and that was enough. Together, they had faced the storm and survived. The days following Tanisha's arrest felt like a strange blur for Jaden and Marcus. The sense of relief that she was finally gone was overwhelming. But it was quickly followed by the realization that the emotional toll of everything they had endured would take time to fully process. The police had taken their statements, and Detective Harris had reassured them that Tanisha would be facing serious charges, but even with her out of the picture, the fear she had left behind still lingered. Jaden spent the next few days feeling like he was in a fog. He found it hard to focus, his thoughts constantly replaying the terrifying moments of Tanisha's invasion of their cabin. The sound of glass shattering, her furious eyes, and the frantic scramble to get help haunted his dreams, leaving him tossing and turning at night. He had stood up to Tanisha before, at the wedding, but seeing her up close again, this time filled with rage and desperation, had shaken him in ways he couldn't fully understand. Marcus, too, struggled with the aftermath. Though he tried to remain strong for Jaden, the weight of everything that had happened pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had come so close to losing everything: his son, his life, and the family they had worked so hard to build together. The guilt gnawed at him constantly. He couldn't help but think of the many red flags he had ignored, the warnings he hadn't heeded. How had he let someone so dangerous get so close to Jaden? How had he allowed her to manipulate him so completely? Despite the heavy emotions, Marcus was determined to move forward, both for Jaden and for himself. He knew they couldn't live in fear forever. The cabin, once their refuge, had become a place marked by violence and fear, so they decided to cut the trip short and return home. The drive back was quiet, the ocean fading into the background as the familiar streets of their town came back into view. It was strange to be home again after everything that had happened. The house felt different, almost foreign, even though it had always been their sanctuary. When they stepped inside, the first thing they noticed was the silence. There were no traces of Tanisha, no physical remnants of the chaos she had brought into their lives, but her presence still lingered in their minds. Marcus set down their bags and glanced around the living room, as if half expecting her to be there, even though he knew she was behind bars. Jaden stood beside him, equally quiet, his eyes scanning the room with a mix of relief and trepidation. "Welcome home," Marcus said softly, trying to inject some warmth into the moment. Jaden gave him a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. They spent the first few hours unpacking and trying to settle back into their usual routine. Marcus busied himself with chores, laundry, tidying up, anything to distract his mind from the heavy thoughts weighing on him. Jaden, on the other hand, found himself retreating to his room more often than not. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts a jumble of emotions he couldn't quite sort through. By the third day, Marcus realized that something needed to change. They couldn't just go on like this, pretending everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. The weight of what had happened was still hanging over them, and if they didn't address it, it would only fester. One evening after dinner, Marcus sat down with Jaden in the living room. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow through the windows, but the atmosphere inside the house felt heavy. "Jaden," Marcus began, his voice gentle, "I've been thinking. I know we've been through a lot lately, and I can see it's still affecting you. It's affecting me too." Jaden didn't say anything at first, but he nodded, his eyes focused on the floor. "I want you to know," Marcus continued, "that it's okay to feel scared or confused or angry. After everything we've been through, it's normal to feel those things. But we can't keep bottling it up. We need to talk about it. We need to face it." Jaden swallowed, his voice small when he finally spoke. "I'm still scared, Dad, even though she's gone. I keep thinking about what could have happened. What if I hadn't said anything at the wedding? What if she had hurt you in the cabin? It's like I can't stop replaying it in my head." Marcus's heart ached hearing the fear in his son's voice. He moved closer, wrapping an arm around Jaden's shoulders. "I've been thinking the same thing," he admitted. "I've had moments where I can't believe how close we came to losing everything. But we didn't, Jaden. You were brave. You spoke up when it mattered most. And because of that, we're still here, together." Jaden leaned into his father's side, finding comfort in the familiar warmth of his embrace. "I just want things to go back to the way they were," he whispered. "Before all of this." "I know," Marcus said softly, "I want that too, and we'll get there. But it's going to take time. And it's okay if we're not there yet." They sat in silence for a few moments, the soft hum of the neighborhood outside providing a calming backdrop. Jaden finally broke the silence. Do you think we should talk to someone, like a counselor or something? Marcus was surprised at first, but then he nodded. I think that's a really good idea. We've been through a lot, and sometimes it helps to talk to someone who can help us sort through it all. Jaden looked up at him, a hint of relief in his eyes. Okay, he said quietly. Maybe that would help. The decision to see a therapist was the first step in their healing process. Marcus made the arrangements, and within a week, they started attending counseling sessions together. At first, it felt strange opening up to a stranger about the most vulnerable parts of their lives. But as the sessions went on, both Jaden and Marcus found that it was helping. They talked about their fears, their guilt, and their lingering anxiety. It wasn't easy, but with each session, they felt a little lighter, a little more at peace. Jaden, in particular, began to find his voice again. The nightmares still came, but they were less frequent, and he started to feel more like himself. He returned to his hobbies, reconnecting with friends and spending more time outdoors. Marcus, too, felt the shift. The guilt that had weighed him down for so long began to lift, and he focused on rebuilding the strong bond he had always shared with his son. Though the memory of Tanisha's betrayal would never fully fade, they were no longer trapped by it. Together, they were learning to move forward one step at a time. One evening, as they sat together on the back porch watching the stars twinkle above, Marcus looked over at Jaden and smiled. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. Jaden smiled back, feeling the truth of his father's words settle in his heart. "Yeah," he said softly, "we are.